Hello, I'm Kamal Santamaria. This is Counting the Cost on Al Jazeera, your weekly look at the world of business and finance. This week, oil, but in a place you'd not usually think of. We're looking at Puntland, one of the poorest regions in Africa. But could oil change all that? We talked to one of the men who's drilling for black gold. Also, real estate in Kabul, much more in demand than you might think, but as ever, the bubble has to burst at some point. And we visit the London High Street store where you can walk in and buy a private jet. Recession, austerity, apparently not for all. All that plus an interview with the World Bank on its latest growth forecasts, and surprise, surprise, they're not good. But we want to start in a region of Africa which is hoping to see just how transformational and powerful natural resources can be to a struggling economy. We're talking Puntland and we're talking oil. It might just be that this autonomous region of northern Somalia has found the source of its own renewal, or potentially a curse, as such riches can often be. What's for sure is that for the first time in 20 years, companies are drilling for oil in Puntland. Here it is on the map, Puntland in the Horn of Africa, and specifically two large blocks of oil there called the Dahrua Valley and Nogal Valley blocks. They are sizable, 36,000 square kilometres combined, which is around the size of the island of Taiwan. And beneath the ground, an estimated 19 billion barrels of oil. Now, not all of it is recoverable, but remember, oil's easily over $100 a barrel, so a basic calculation gives us a potential $2 trillion to be made. Compare that to the size of the Puntland economy on its own, just $5.9 billion in 2010, with a meagre average income per capita of just $600. Now, just to put the region in some context, Puntland's been a semi-autonomous region in Somalia since 1998. It was formed in response to the collapse of the government and the ongoing civil war in the south. It has been calm recently compared to the lawless south, but illegal fishing, dumping and piracy along the coast are a barrier to progress. Though you might remember from last week's Counting the Cost, we did report on how piracy money had in fact helped the region, which has little in the way of infrastructure or industry. Oil, though, could offer the real jobs and revenue the region does desperately need. Now, one of the companies drilling for oil is Australia's Range Resources. And we've got its Executive Director, Peter Landau, joining us from Perth in Western Australia this week. Peter, thank you for your time. I would like, if I could, a brief history lesson actually to start with. This is the first drilling in Puntland in 20 years. What has happened in those 20 years? Was it just too dangerous? Did companies have to get out 20 years ago? Tell me the backstory.
Sure. I mean, I think it's, I think most from Westerners can appreciate, I think Black Hawk Down is probably the one incident that people remember which led to an end to sort of like the federal Somalia as was known in the, in the 70s and 80s. So with that and the removal of obviously the UN and all the Western forces from Somalia, basically the country was split in three. You had Somaliland basically going back to its traditional tribal origins and being autonomous rule. Obviously, Puntland similarly became autonomous, and then you had Mogadishu, which was always a little bit more complicated with the added influx of warlords in the earlier years and the Islamic fundamentalists in the later years. So from Puntland's perspective, it really, the former President Hersey started the search for partners in the oil and gas and mineral industry at around 2002. And, for the first 3 or 4 years did not have much luck because stability-wise, it was an unknown commodity. Not only that, you still did have a transitional federal government in southern Somalia, so there was confusion as to actually who had the legitimate rights to minerals and hydrocarbons in the area. And I know it's I'm trying not to be facetious, but piracy has actually done Puntland from a perception point of view, where it has done it a lot of credibility and a lot of positiveness in that you have Western governments and the EU and the UN dealing with the Puntland government and recognising that this is a responsible government. And it can be dealt with as the legitimate ruler of Puntland.
And so you get to this drilling stage now, the pointy end of things, if you like, but you as a company have been there for 7 years already. With all the research and testing you've no doubt done in that time, how confident are you about the real oil prospects here? We know there's a lot. Tell me about short and long term and really how much you can get out of this.
Well, I mean, we're incredibly confident, and I think, again, sorry for going back to an historical lesson, but originally when the Hunt brothers found oil in Yemen in the early 80s, everyone started looking at their geological field maps, and what was established is that the two producing basins in Yemen, which I think to date have produced anywhere from 3 to 4 billion barrels, are replicated geologically in Puntland. So the Nugal and Daror Valley are geological replicas, if you'd like, mirror images of what we found, what was found in Yemen. Very few people have ever doubted the significance of a hydrocarbon basin in Puntland in those two basins, and obviously we're very hopeful that the discoveries will be made sooner rather than later.
Peter, let's talk about the business itself. As I'm sure you're all too aware of, oil companies, wherever they go, whatever they do, they will inevitably come under the spotlight or be accused of coming in and taking the money and running. What is Range doing to make sure that you do give back adequately to the Puntland region?
Okay, I mean, it's a very good question. I think it all started from day one, both in terms of not only with the PSA, or we originally had a contract of work terms, as well as which provided for monthly payments to the government, direct to the government since we've been there, monthly payments have been made, which have gone into infrastructure predominantly. That is always a standard in terms of government payments, instead of upfront payments, which you'll find with sign-on bonuses in Angola, Nigeria. Our sign-on bonuses were monthly originally. And now moving into the drilling development phase, there are a number of features of the PSA. Obviously, an off-the-top royalty goes to the government, anywhere from 4 to 12% of revenue based on daily production. You have a 50-50 profit split with regards to after cost recovery, with regards to going to the government, and then more importantly, because people will say, well, what about in the years leading up to production? You have basically exploration taxes, which is quite unusual, where the operator pays, I think it's around 3 or 4% to the government based on money spent into the ground, as well as then the obligations with regard to using local workforce, local tenders with regards to any of your operations in country. So there is a really multi-tiered approach, and I think the days of the accusations that oil companies will just go in and rape and pillage and leave nothing behind. I think the world's probably a bit too transparent nowadays for that to happen. The one good thing about oil and oil exploration is because of ultimately the potential, especially in Puntland with multi-billion barrel reservoir systems, there is certainly enough to be shared and to go round. And so for that reason, we're very comfortable that we've never been accused of potentially just going in and ignoring what's happening in country. And even with this current program, I think we've already done 9. I think there's another 9 that we're going to do, community development projects relating to water wells, obviously health, education, as part of this drilling program itself.
And that program includes, or does it include, should I say, training up the locals? Invariably, all operations in Africa and here in the Middle East as well, they involve a lot of expat expertise, being brought in. Is there a long-term plan to get the region not entirely self-sufficient, but supporting itself to a degree?
Yeah, I mean, there is, but I'm not going to I can't be naive and say that the training is happening now, because ultimately there isn't scope for training when you're in a sort of like an exploration phase. The opportunity in the exploration phase is obviously directly related to logistics and security, but the PSAs themselves actually mandate the operator, which us and Horn Petroleum, to provide longer term training programs. Now, in the initial stage, that would involve more relating to the government and the actual ministry itself. But moving forward, clearly with the discovery, that is when those training programs will definitely kick in, and obviously we would see a much bigger beneficial stage to the government and the people upon a commercial discovery being made.
That is Peter Lander from Range Resources in Western Australia. Great talking to you, Peter. Thank you.
Kamal, thanks for the opportunity.
And there's plenty more still ahead on Counting the Cost. We're in Kabul, Miami, London, as well as the Indian slum the government wants to tear down, and why many feel Mumbai's economic heart could be torn out. Right now, though, some new numbers out from the World Bank, its latest Global Economic Prospects report, which isn't really providing the numbers we want as far as growth prospects for 2012 go. In fact, there's a sort of brace yourself feel to the report, the idea that global financial crisis 2, as it were, could end up being worse than the original. Start with the global prospects, which were looking all right at 3.6%, but have now been cut to 2.5%. Much worse when we look at just the Eurozone, which had modest growth rate of 1.8% forecast, but that is now in negative territory, a contraction of 0.3%. And even the new engines of growth, the emerging nations like the BRICS, have been revised down. They were looking at 6.2% growth. Now that is down at 5.4%. Well, earlier in the week, we spoke to the World Bank about this very report. Andrew Burns, who is their Manager of Global Macroeconomics in the Development Prospects Group, joined us on the broadband from Paris. I started by asking him about that last point, the cut in growth prospects for emerging nations who've been providing the strength when there was none in Europe.
Well, that's absolutely right. We're looking at a situation of a global slowdown. It's occurring in Europe, which is very much in the international news. But it's also something that we see happening in many of the middle-income countries until now that have been the real drivers of global growth. So we see Brazil, for example, had zero growth in the third quarter. India has had negative industrial production for several months. These are concerning features of the current situation, particularly with the slowdown in Europe.
And if the IMF, as the reports we've heard, is looking for another $500 billion odd for its war chest, if you like, a lot of that would have come from the likes of the emerging countries. It puts everything at risk.
Well, I'm not sure that I would interpret it in particularly that manner. I think we're looking at a situation where we have a global slowing where the outlook is a little more precarious than we would like it to be. We've had a clear indication of contagion from some of the stresses in high-income Europe to the developing world. We saw capital flows to developing countries fall by 55%. But nevertheless, that 5.5% or 5.4% growth that we're forecasting for 2012 is a very strong score for developing countries, something that if it had been occurring in the 1990s would have been considered a record year.
What do you want to see from Europe? Because we talk about things getting worse if Europe doesn't solve its debt crisis. Debt crises don't solve themselves. They are big, long-term things, and certainly short-term bailouts don't sort out the long-term problems. What do you want to see before revising any sort of growth forecasts?
Well, what we're really focusing on in this report is the impact of what's happening now and what might happen if things were to deteriorate on developing countries. And there, the real story is one of developing countries not being in as strong a shape as they were in 2008, 2009, not being able to potentially withstand or come back from a deterioration to the same degree as they were before. So we see the potential for remittances to fall by about 6.3%. We see the possibility of commodity prices in the event of a downturn being much weaker than they are now, and that having knock-on effects for growth in developing countries.
Yeah, but you've got to have a view on where Europe needs to go. Maybe you don't want to say that explicitly in the report, but we've been waiting for some sort of strong political movement from Europe. It started, you might say, particularly between Merkel and Sarkozy, but what do you want to see?
Well, I think if we're looking at the situation in Europe, there's a lot that is positive. There's a lot that has been undertaken. We have the EFSF. We have the stronger effort by the European Central Bank, and we've seen the result of that in much stronger bond auctions in recent weeks and a decline in the spreads that are being paid on some of these countries' debt. So all of that's relatively positive. Our concern is you've got to look forward and do some contingency planning in case things do deteriorate.
Yeah, so you've described pockets of good economic news. What about the political side of things in Europe? Because that is what this has almost turned into, a political drama which is holding up the economic changes which need to happen.
Well, as I've indicated, Kamal, for us, the real focus here is not so much on Europe. I mean, that's obviously a very central factor in what's happening in the global economy. But really what we're trying to do is talk with our clients in the developing world and give them some sense of the potential implications and where the vulnerabilities are for them, not really trying to solve Europe's problems for them at this time.
Andrew Burns there from the World Bank discussing its latest rather grim forecasts. Now to Afghanistan, where first war and then investment brought many foreigners to the capital. That of course means a higher demand for real estate, which has pushed up property prices as a result. But now we've got this scaling down of commitments in Afghanistan starting to kick in. So what's happened to the property bubble? Jennifer Glass has the story.
$1 million 16-bedroom house in Kabul. Property dealer Fida Mohammed Utahay is trying to find a tenant. Early this summer, the rent was $25,000 a month. Now it's $15,000, and still no takers. Owning property in central Kabul used to be a lucrative business. Now dozens of houses sit empty.
The reason is there are a lot of foreigners here. Many have gone now. There is much less demand for houses like this.
A series of high-profile attacks in the city, announcements of troop drawdowns, and a smaller amount of international aid money have caused some house prices to fall by as much as 40%. But some parts of the market are thriving. On the outskirts of Kabul, a new development complete with its own supermarket, school, and mosque is attracting Afghan buyers.
One main reason people live here is security. Government officials and officers who are concerned about living in single-storey houses in Kabul or who have security problems prefer to live here.
This is just the first part of a much larger development, a new city on the edge of the capital.
A shortage of housing here in Kabul means projects like this one are thriving. The owners here say they can't build units fast enough to keep up with demand. And the prices of properties here are rising too.
We wanted to have a big single house with a big yard, but like lots of people in Kabul, we could not afford it.
Despite the downturn in central Kabul, building continues. Afghans are concerned about what will happen here after 2014, when all foreign forces are scheduled to leave. But some have enough confidence to keep investing, hoping there are more lucrative days ahead.
Which is what they're hoping for too in the Dharavi slum of Mumbai, India. Already it's a lucrative place, an enormous site of industry and commerce, as well as being the largest slum in Asia. But it is a plan by the Indian government to turn it into a multi-billion-dollar township, which is now really raising concerns. Have a look at this now from Prerna Suri.
It doesn't look much, but inside Mumbai's Dharavi slum, the largest in Asia, business is booming. At this factory, clothes are designed, manufactured and packed off to the rest of the world. Sheikh Mubin's family has been in this business for the past 30 years.
Everything that I am is because of Dharavi. I'm completely attached to this place. It's like a country to me.
Spread over 600 acres, Dharavi is home to over tens of thousands of families. It's also a strong industrial hub with thousands working in the leather and garment industries. And some estimates suggest the annual turnover from this place is anything between $500 to $650 million. But the Indian government now wants to develop Dharavi into a multi-billion-dollar township. In exchange, they've offered residents new apartments.
Many of the shops that you see here have been around for decades, and for tens of thousands of people, this is their only source of livelihood. It might look old, congested, even dirty, but people here say that this is their only real home and workplace, and moving out of here without an alternative plan isn't really an option.
But the government is keen to move ahead with its plans. That's because real estate prices in Mumbai remain one of the highest in the world. So Dharavi, with its prime location in the heart of Mumbai, offers more space in a city that's shrinking.
If it is done the way it has been planned, 20 million square feet of office space and another 20 million square feet of residential space will hit the market. I'm sure the rentals and the prices there would become a lot more reasonable.
Dharavi's fate for now remains uncertain. But the fear here is that in the race for commercial development, those left behind will be the very people who built this place.
Now, you can't have missed the extraordinary pictures out of Italy this past week. The giant cruise ship Costa Concordia run aground, lying on its side, and those frantic rescue attempts surrounding it. There'll be an economic scramble too, because this is big business. Carnival, which owns and operates the ship, has already talked of the accident costing $100 million. But the costs will go higher. Espirito Santo Bank, for example, estimates $1 billion worth of insurance claims for this accident alone. That is in an industry which pulls in some $34 billion a year worldwide. And just to give you an example of how we get to that number, for example, a week-long cruise for a family of 4, that would be in the realm of $2,600 in the busy months, which actually sounds like a pretty good deal. But think about how many people just one ship can hold, and you see it really is very, very big business. Now, much of it, including Carnival, is based in Miami in the United States. Andy Gallagher is himself based there for us and sent us this report on how the cruise industry copes with accidents like this.
In Florida, big cruise ships equal big business. Around 12 million passengers a year board cruise liners in South Florida alone, and the industry employs over 10,000 people locally. Pictures of a supercruiser lying on its side aren't good for business, although some tourists haven't been put off.
It's a little bit like flying. You know that there are accidents that do happen, typically due to human error, but that doesn't stop people, at least not us and most people, I think, from taking a flight. So I think that the probability that there will be an accident while being on a cruise ship is highly unlikely.
It may be too early to tell if bookings will be affected, but experts say many passengers might not be fully aware of how much legal recourse they have.
Because when you go on a cruise, you are agreeing to the terms and conditions contained in the cruise ticket contract, and that's about a 10-page document full of tiny little print that I would tell any reviewers to go look at so that they could see what I'm talking about. And all it is just as much fine print as possible in order to take away a passenger's rights.
The cruise industry has gone to great lengths to keep its passengers safe and its cabins full. And whilst the blame has been placed on the Costa Concordia's captain, in the long run it's the Carnival Corporation that will have to deal with any consequences.
It's crystal clear that the cruise line is 100% responsible for the conduct of the captain. So while publicly they'll say it was the captain's fault and he was this rogue agent acting like a fool, but in reality, regardless of how he was acting, this conduct in the course of scope of his job, they're responsible for.
Accidents on cruise ships are rare, but they can have a lasting impact. This business might now have to start rebuilding confidence at a time when ticket sales are already down. For the entire industry, then, this is a public relations nightmare. The global recession is already forcing holidaymakers to think carefully about where they spend their money. An accident this visual and this tragic won't help.
Finally, a bit of a high-end story, something for the 1%, you might say, but we do try to cater for everyone. Because as we've discovered, if you do have a bit of disposable income lying around, you could always pop into a high street store in London to buy a private jet off the rack. Or is it off the hanger? Dreams are free, we like to say, so we sent Sonia Gallego down to the showroom to take a look around.
It's a ticket to a high-flying world frequented by the very few. Owning a corporate jet is one of the many benefits of belonging to the privileged 1% club, an out-of-reach dream for mere millionaires. For the rest of the world, a global downturn has meant hard times, economic turmoil and social unrest. But against this backdrop, there appears to be one industry that is doing very well, and that's the business jet industry. In the heart of London's exclusive Belgravia, the traditional second home neighbourhood of tycoons and billionaire leaders, a one-stop shop for those looking for an aspirational pick-me-up. The jet business company caters to those who can afford to drop several $1 million on a plane of their choosing. Designed to replicate the interior of a super slick Airbus, Jet Business allows clients to choose from a range of planes from its own iPad app. This could be seen as the ultimate in high-end spending, and demand for corporate jets has been increasing, especially from emerging economies. A chance for prospective clients to show they've arrived in style.
The demand is definitely coming from China. And right now, if you look at the total global market, there's about 19,000 jets in the world. And today there's 125 registered owners in China. So since they have a considerable amount of the world population, there's a huge, huge demand.
And for the cost-conscious oligarch looking to save $1 million or so bucks, they'll even locate a second-hand jet, which of course could always be upgraded during more profitable times. Sonia Gallego for Counting the Cost in London.
And that is our lot for this week, but if you want to get in touch with the show, 3 easy ways to do it. Twitter, first of all, at Kamal AJE. It's me, obviously. Our business editor is at Abd Oliver Ali, all one word, or email is just fine, counting the cost at aljazeera.net. Then you can head over to aljazeera.com/business, link on to the CTC page. We put all our episodes up in full there for you to catch up on whenever you want. But that is it for this edition of Counting the Cost. I'm Kamal Santamaria from the whole team. Thanks for joining us. The news on Al Jazeera is next.